Today I'm going to discuss about minimum system requirement of Windows Server 2012. The minimum system requirement of Windows Server 2012 is must require before you go ahead and install the server, even if you are planning to migrate from Windows Server 2008 or to Windows Server 2012. Then what are the minimum requirement for the system hardware? You need to know about it. So basically the minimum requirements are same as 2008 R2. We not face any difference, but you will get some changes as well once you go ahead and move to your system and move your the environment from server 2008 R2 to server 2012. So when you talk about the system requirement, and when you talk about the processor, it should be of x64 or 64-bit processor, because server 2012 won't support the 32-bit processor. It won't install in a 32-bit processor. So any processor after Core2Duo are supported to 64-bit processor. It means Core2Duo and processor before Core2Duo and Core2Duo will not support Windows Server 2012. So we're not able to install the server on those operating system. Also, the operating system will support 1.4 gigahertz frequency processor. So the clock of 1.4 gigahertz frequency should be there. The processor should have the 1.4 gigahertz clock frequency. So this is the minimum requirement for the processor. It should be of 64-bit processor. It also have to have 1.4 gigahertz frequency. So this is the minimum requirement for the processor. Windows Server 2012 does not support 32-bit or even a Itanium-based 64-bit processor. So even the first thing is the Windows Server 2012 won't support the 32-bit processor. So if you have a processor of 32-bit, it will not support. And also if you have a Tanium based processor, but if it is 64-bit, then also Windows Server 2012 will not gonna support it. As we have mentioned that last time when we have made an introduction video, we have clarified that Windows Server 2012 has stopped the support from Itanium based processors, and they also stopped the Itanium based edition. So any if you are willing to move, and if you have a Itanium based processor, 64-bit processor, willing to move to Windows Server 2012, you need to change the processor before you are actually migrating. Now another system requirement is about the storage, and before that we're going to move to the RAM. The minimum requirement for RAM is 512, and that is the minimum requirement you need to install Windows Server 2012. Although the system's maximum limit is the limit on x64, and in this particular chart you will to see the maximum RAM requirements are, or the limit of the requirements are, which is 4 TB. It is not minimum requirement, but it is the limit of the storage, which is 4 TB for data center. For standard, it's 4 TB. When you talk about the Windows Server 2012 Essential, the limit is 64 GB. Windows Server 2012 Foundation, which is 32 GB. The storage server 2012 work group, which is of 32 GB. Foundation is 32 GB. Storage server 2012 standard, which is of 4 TB, and Hyper-V are of 4 TB. So this is the limit of the memory of every edition, every version. So limit on 64-bit processors, and the limit of this memory, which is of each and every edition, has minimum of 4 TB for standard data center and standard Hyper-V server 2012. So this is the minimum limit. The RAM, which is the minimum requirement for the RAM, is 512 MB for Windows Server 2012. Now, when you're talking about the system requirement for the storage, so the disk space, which is the minimum requirement of the storage, is 32 GB. So in 32 GB, you're able to install Windows Server 2012. But when you're talking about if you install the system over a network, if you are willing to install the system over a network, then you need minimum hard disk of more than that. Means this is the minimum requirement is 32 GB, but you need hard disk of more space if you're willing to install the system over a network. Or computers with more than 16 GB of RAM will require more disk space for paging, hibernation, and dump files. So these are the minimum requirements if your system is working on more than 16 GB of RAM. So the disk space will require more space required for paging, hibernation, and dump files. So the space which is minimum is 32 GB, but you need more in these two criteria, or your requirement is falling in these two criteria. Now, when you're talking about the miscellaneous requirement, so miscellaneous requirement is if you need to have a DVD drive to install, for example, the rows. You need to, if you're willing to install the server itself via DVD drive, then you can do that by putting a DVD in a DVD drive, or any other hardware compatibility software. For example, any installations are required, you can go through the DVD as well. So any hardware which is required to install on the system, and if any driver support is required to be installed for the hardware, DVD drive is a requirement here and this is what the miscellaneous requirement, the first miscellaneous requirement. Also, you need to have the monitor of at least a Super VGA 800 and to 600 or higher resolution. So this is the driver you need it for the monitor, and the highest resolution, which is 800 into 600 or higher resolution. Also, you need to have a keyboard and Microsoft mouse or other compatible pointing devices, through that you can able to access the Windows Server 2012. So, and again, you need to have internet access. If for example, near future Windows release any security update, any bug, or taking a feedback regarding the operating system, you can very much easily able to share it and get it through the internet access. So you need to have internet access and other network driver installed in Windows Server 2012 just for the dedicated driver or dedicated network card to have internet access. So this is what the minimum requirement of Windows Server 2012 is, and I hope you learned something about it, the minimum system requirement, before you go ahead and install Windows Server 2012 in your system. Hope you learned something from it. Thanks for watching.